it's like leaving the Chicago Bulls in their peak, in the Michael Jordan peak, to like go start an expansion franchise somewhere else and say like, hey, we want to win the NBA title in 2 years. And it kind of looked more like that. But it was such a great experience for us, and it did work out well. And I think more than anything, I just think it brought us closer to the roots of what paddling a river is kind of meant to be like, just those natural elements, those natural intrinsic attributes of paddling a natural river is so cool.
So usually in this conversation, which has gone anywhere near an agenda, and I love it, I like to ask a question about what is something that's very challenging that you have endured or overcome in your world. And I'd love to go back and maybe touch on one or two things that have been a challenge for you in your life at some point, Joe, that you endured and overcame. So could you take us back to a critical juncture, something that was hard for you, please?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and I was trying to think of the right way to say it. I don't know that it was as hard as much as it was, but it involved a lot of courage, a decision that involved a lot of courage. So in relative to the sport of whitewater canoeing, I was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area, which I know to a lot of people, anyone in the United States listening to this would think, well, there's no advantage to living in Washington, D.C. these days. But I got to tell you, for whitewater canoeing, it's an amazing place to live. The Potomac River has these world-class whitewater river rapids just in this major metropolitan area. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And when I was young, when I was in 10, 11, 12 years old, I was learning to paddle at summer camp. And the group that was training on the Potomac River at that time, they were all world champions and the legendary coach of the sport. And I got invited into the training group at a young age, not because I was good, but really because I just enjoyed showing up. And my mom was a big fan of the character of the people that were in the group. And so I trained with this group for a long time. And even I made the U.S. national team while I was still living in the D.C. area when I was the youngest athlete on the team when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
And I raced in my first couple world championships. But leading to your question, so at this point, whitewater canoeing was not on the Olympic program yet. It was a couple of years in, it was 2 years into my national team career where whitewater, it was 1989, and whitewater was added for the 1992 Olympic program. And that was interesting. Like my canoe partner and I had started to get pretty good at the sport. We were starting to win medals in World Cup races. We came in 5th place at the World Championships, pretty good result. And with the Olympics on the horizon and some money and resources coming into the sport from the U.S. Olympic Committee, we made a really hard decision, and that was to leave Washington, to leave the greatest, most proven training group in the history of our sport. And we moved to Western North Carolina to the Nantahala River down in Swain County, Bryson City, North Carolina.
Yeah.
We moved to the Nantahala, kind of the middle of nowhere, where we could just sort of put all the proverbial eggs in one basket. And it was such an interesting move. It was really bold. And what happened was, instead of being a part of the greatest training group in the world, we were now charged with starting our own training group from scratch. And it was so interesting, Matt, because living at the Nantahala, I think it really brought me a lot closer to the roots of the sport. I often in the beginning questioned whether, leaving a group of world champions was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But I loved just kind of being out in nature, and I love that more remote location. And I love, not being on the schedule and the pace of Washington, D.C., and being on the pace of the Great Smoky Mountains, which was just, it was absolutely amazing. And Appalachia and all that goes along with it. And it was so cool. And so that ended up working out really well for us, because I think that not only did we have it sort of brought out a lot of creativity, into our training, into our equipment, and how we sort of designed our pursuit of the 1992 Olympics. But I think that just escaping the training dynamic, of that period in Washington D.C. was also really good for us as well. That was changing the disposition of the athletes there were changing, and yeah, it was a good thing. So I would just say more than I don't want to say it was like a hardship, but it took a lot of
Yeah.
courage leaving such a top group. I mean, it's like leaving the Chicago Bulls in their peak, in the Michael Jordan peak, to like go start an expansion franchise somewhere else and say like, hey, we want to win the NBA title in 2 years. And it kind of looked more like that. But it was such a great experience for us, and it did work out well. And yeah, I think more than anything, I just think it brought us closer to the roots of what paddling a river is kind of meant to be like. Just those natural elements, those natural intrinsic attributes of paddling a natural river is so cool.
Yeah. It's amazing you just mentioned this because literally, like 2 weeks ago, I went to the Great Smoky Mountains National Forest for the first time, went camping for the first time in my life, and we were walking up the trail right there, starting in Bryson City. So literally, this is fresh in my mind a couple weeks ago, just thinking about we always heard a loud sound the entire time of the river, and we would look down, and man, it looked fierce. I mean, there were plenty of rocks right in the middle, plenty of places that it looked like it was nearly impassable or very difficult to navigate. And just to think that's where you were training at the age of 19 ish,
Yeah.
you're training in that very adverse, challenging condition. At least for me, it seemed very challenging.